Okay, it is February 18th, and it is actually Ash Wednesday. Fat Tuesday was yesterday. And obviously, many of you enjoy Valentine's weekend. We have a great guest today, and a lot of things going on in the world. The Disruptive 50 is coming on CNBC, and there's a little company called Zipline that may make the list thanks to John Butler. But before we get going, let's have John Sibley Butler play some music.
Riding on the city of New Orleans, Illinois Central, Monday morning rail. 15 cars and 15 restless passengers, three conductors and 25 sacks of mail.
All right. Thank you, Johnny. So, John Sibley Butler, a lot going on. Disruptive 50 at CNBC is happening. You're probably busy with many things. We got several projects going on cities and utilities, but what say you?
Well, I think you're exactly right. The CNBC Disruptive Technologies is here. In addition to Ziploc, which is the most amazing company that we've talked about, there's a company that really enhances the movement of the electricity in your area, through everything, especially when it comes to the data, all of the data science and then the movement of data. There's a company that's getting the helicopter to fly better. Right now, the helicopter has to bank. And of course, it's become very, very problematic. And myself being an old chopper guy from Num, I thought that was very, very interesting. The most important thing that I've been looking at, Andreas, is how we pay for things. I mean, the cloud is just it. I went to see my Longhorns play my alma mater last night, and everything is done by the credit card. And even if you want to open up an attachment, if you don't belong to a big organization, you have to pay. But you're exactly right. The number of startups that will change how we do things is absolutely amazing. Now, caught into all of that, which people are not really talking about, is how cities are connected to that change. That is, if we look at city managers, if we look at what cities will look like, and I contend that every city now is on a platform, and perhaps there's no difference than Austin and Dallas on the platform and San Antonio. But still, on the other hand, what happens is that people still have to have the basic income. And then, of course, we have what is going on around the globe politically. Uh, and if you look at what's happening in the context of our country, where I think that Texas is courting Goldman Sachs now to move Goldman Sachs out of New York to Y'all Street, which will be in Dallas and San Antonio,
Yeah.
along with the new stock market. What we have to do is look at all of this connectivity. The most important thing now is that the connectivity around the globe. Now, for the first time, also we have a new hegemony in the world, a hegemon in the world, and it's China, and that is real. I was telling someone the other day that sometimes back, the Chinese said, we need our students to do like you've done in Austin, Texas, and not just do case studies on existing companies. And yours truly went to the University of Beijing to really put in their decks and how to raise companies and how to create companies. I had a real tough time because they were certainly interested in classes where they would do a case study on IBM, or a case study on Dell, or a case study on whatever have you. But I had to put in the fact that, look, you're going to write your own cases with the deck. You're going to create your own companies. And now that I look at China, I think that China is absolutely real. And from the eyes of an academician who was a research professor, with
Mm-hmm.
many books. I think they're courting scientists to have their education in in China. I think Canada is doing the same thing. And then if you look at it, the geopolitical, Germany is now going to rearm themselves. Japan is rearming themselves. But the question that we always ask is, look, what does it mean for prosperity and for job creation? I think finally, Andreas, this is the most exciting time I have seen for the creation in a different kind of way
Mm-hmm.
of jobs and wealth as jobs disappear. I have never seen so much excitement around the cloud and how the cloud itself will bring prosperity because we really do not know what it will look like.
Mm-hmm.
As my distinguished colleague would tell you, Llewellyn King, I've been following all of his White House conference stuff. AI is real. Anything repetitive is real. And so we're going to revert back to the core disciplines that allow people to think about business models,
Mm-hmm.
from philosophy, right, to the idea of what it are mathematics, psychology, sociology, economics, anthropology, because the technology stuff, of course, all comes out of philosophy, and philosophy created computer science. Computer science created these things. Sociology created data analytics, which they've been doing for 100 years with the census. But what we have to do, and we have a competitor. China is real. Is the American empire falling? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. But
No.
I can tell you this, scientists will move from country to country. And let us not remember that flight was created by German scientists.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not forget that, okay? And so it has always been the relationship between opportunities in America and when scientists come to America to change our business models.
Yep.
And if you look at the data, finally, since 1870 census, I don't want to get too academic here in my professor stuff. Since 1870, immigrants have a much higher propensity to be self-employed than the native born.
Yep.
60% of those companies in Silicon Valley were newcomers.
Yep.
So I think it's interesting, but we have to prepare ourselves for the opportunity around
Absolutely.
technology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Llewellyn King, what say you?
Well, I just want to mention that AI seems to occupy an awful lot of my life. And the more I read about it, the more people I interview about it, the less I understand it. And apparently, those who operate it, those who are involved with it, understand it less as time goes on, as they find neural networks are talking to each other, agents are chatting with each other, and then creating a third entity. We have very little idea where it's going. I was on Forbes, not Forbes, Bloomberg this week, talking about this and saying that I think the future may be very narrow uses of AI. Rather than looking at the totality of it, we need to look at it and how we can use it as a tool for a specific purpose, which would also, and I've just started talking to people about this, so I'm not fully informed, but also it would reduce the electricity demand because you wouldn't be processing so much extraneous material every time you used it. And that's an interesting possibility. I interviewed somebody yesterday who is a professor, and he was very enthusiastic about AI because he can use it for sociological work to determine who's likely to fail in society, who will become homeless, who will fall out of the medical.
Introduce myself. I am
And,
Charles, a virtual.
Go ahead.
and
Yeah, I was taking over
that's
the
very
podcast.
interesting. And if you look across the board, Most people are scared of the job losses, but those who are using AI are very excited. I think I reported a couple of weeks ago that I'd been in southern Spain at a conference of creative people using AI who were all young. They were predominantly women, and they were all very excited. 1,200 of them, not a little tiny conference. They were using it to design clothes, design automobiles, do artwork, and they had nothing but excitement, and also they're making money from it. So
Yeah.
we don't know. You can't get hold of the whole thing. It is a threat to labor. It does look as though an awful lot of mechanical work will be handed over to AI. Meanwhile, the world is not entirely run by AI. It's run by human beings still, and it's not entirely run by the Chinese still. It's run by us at the moment, and we've got a lot on our plate. We're waiting for the State of the Union address, which will reveal maybe where we're going. It will certainly mention the coming election and what actions might be taken to impede that
Yeah.
happy end. It will also look at and probably explain what we are hoping to do in Iran, where we have a huge fleet and are ready for war, but war without people. And we know that bombing alone doesn't work. It hasn't actually solved anything in Gaza. It didn't in Vietnam. It's a part of a war plan. It is not a plan in itself. And it's very dangerous to think that you can achieve your troops, your goals without troops on the ground. And after you've done that, how do you disengage? So
Yeah.
we're looking at big threats in that department. We still do not have peace in Ukraine. It looks as though the Ukrainians may be forced, with the president's thumb on the scale, to settle for a loss of a lot of real estate, and that's not very encouraging. Gaza remains open. The president's board is not getting wholehearted support, and it doesn't appear that it has a cohesive plan. Meanwhile, Israel does appear to be taking over more territory in the West Bank. I've spent a fair amount of time reporting from the West Bank, and I find that very concerning. And so we've got this excitement, and every week we mention on this program startups. So I'd just like to say that startups are great, but all startups do not lead on to victory. All startups do not succeed, and a startup is not per se a measure of anything except a lot of hope and ambition, and sometimes a lot of stray money. There are many startups that start and fail. We tend to think now that startups are to do with high tech and only tech. And of course, the restaurant is a startup, a newspaper is a startup. They have a very high failure rate, by the way, both of those. And in tech, there are many startups that come and go and are not heard of again. I'm concerned that the startup culture has changed, because now startups tend to be preparatory to the sale to large tech companies. I liked it when a startup had as its mission an IPO, and it was a freestanding company. Now startups tend to start out by thinking, if we get this right, if it makes money, if it works, if it's profitable, we'll sell it to Google. That's not actually good. The big techs are too big. They're dominating too much of our thinking, too much of our lives. We need a lot of second-tier major corporations, and startups should provide those as they succeed, as they go public. And that's what I hope we return to. It's how we got the big techs. They were startups that succeeded, went public, and made a lot of people rich, especially the founders. It shouldn't be necessary that we sell every new startup after it crosses the winning line to a large tech. Things are in flux. Nothing is set.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great stuff. That's great stuff. But before we jump and I introduce you guys to our guest speaker, I really have to mention the fact that we have been predicting for a while
Introduce myself.
that we are really in the era of sort of a execution of AI, and I want to share my screen real quick to really record and document our prediction here. Let me share real quick because it's happened. So you probably know about Iron Man.
To introduce myself, I am Jarvis, a virtual artificial intelligence, and I'm here to assist you with a variety of tasks as best I can, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, importing all preferences from home interface. Systems are now fully operational.
So this seems to be science fiction not too long ago, and I'm happy to report that OpenAI acquired OpenClaw, and it was announced yesterday for $1 billion. And the company OpenClaw was created by one person, John Sibley Butler, and is
But
the
wasn't me. I didn't see
and
it.
it is the first unicorn, and this is the OpenClaw website. And if you come to it, you can see that you can actually download it. It is free. What is not free is when you connect your OpenClaw agent, which you can name it whatever you want, and you now connect that to an LLM model, and you need to use tokens, and that's how you would actually start spending money on, because the agent will do whatever it wants once you give it a task to achieve that task. And as I understand it, this started with 10,000 downloads about 3 days ago and is now up to 50 million downloads, and the pace is growing. So it'll probably hit 100 million downloads by the end of today. And OpenAI just acquired it. And the prediction is that it is acquiring it because it's the evolution of ChatGPT. And we no longer will go to a prompt to ask for help and type anything, but we actually have an agent that does everything we need. So, needless to say, I believe that Austin, Texas will play a significant role in the era of AI. And I'm happy to say that we have Thom Singer, who is the CEO of the Austin Technology Council and a long time Austinite, with us today to perhaps have a dialogue about the evolution of Austin and where things are and the journey of startups and the commerce that is going on in Austin, as his company is the major networking organization that makes the connection of the dots and everybody trying to figure out how to move to the next level. Thom, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
So, Thom, tell us, you've heard the intros, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's hard to follow Llewellyn and John. I mean, they're both brilliant when it comes to this. But, from my standpoint, yeah, I mean, AI is going to continue to take up a lot of attention. It's going to work its way into more things that we're doing every day. But I think the thing we have to remember is that it is a tool. When the World Wide Web, remember we used to say www everything. When that first came out, there were actually classes that people went to on how to use the web. When Word and Excel were released, I actually worked for a company called ExecuTrain, and we trained lawyers and business executives on how to turn on a computer and open a spreadsheet. And now you don't have to teach anybody that. People are learning that in first grade. It's ubiquitous. It's just something that everybody's doing. And I think that a lot of these tools that right now we're saying AI, they're just going to become part of our lives, the way a spreadsheet has, the way the internet has, et cetera. It's going very fast, and the tools go, instead of a vertical, AI touches all verticals. But I think that we're going to continue to see a lot of attention put on AI. But I tell everybody, we've got to remember, as all the attention is on tech and moving fast, that in Austin, we have to remember what got us here. And that's what I call HI, which is human interaction. If we lose sight of that, connectivity of person to person, in person, building trust, sharing experiences, then it doesn't matter how much, the technology is doing. People still need to be connected. And, Llewellyn mentioned the fact that, it's impacting labor. There's going to be a big upset in that. However, the people who are well connected always have opportunities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Johnny?
Yeah, Tom, because you are the most important organization. And I just want to have a little history and let you know how you got here. There was a Nobel Prize winner by the name of Ian Pergogine, and we were sitting at the C6-2026. I was a young man, and Pergogine won a Nobel Prize on the self-organizing stuff in space. And just as you talked about human interaction, he said, "I wonder as we move in this experiment in Austin, will humans be self-organizing?" Just like there are self-organizing units in the world, in the space, in the universe? And the answer was no. So from that, we formed the Software Council. We also did the clean energy. And now the Software Council is the Austin Technology Council.
Yes, 34 years strong this year since we were
Yeah,
founded as the Austin Software Council.
So based on your comment of human interaction, it goes back to Pergogine's comment when it was started, that we are not self-organizing people. So one of the things I want to ask you is that, first of all, I want to congratulate you for Austin being a model for so many cities around the globe and in America. The Austin Technology Council carried the banner for what Austin did 40, 50 years ago, and it was a great experiment and it worked. But given that, I think people are getting fed up with the cloud. I think it's getting too over. It's just downloads and lawsuits, uploads and lawsuits. Do you think that in a place like Austin, where the coffee shops used to be where everything got done, how do you see that being done in an interactive world? So when we did South by Southwest, you remember we advertised it as interactive, and it was a big thing. How do we get back to that human interaction in this next generation that don't want to speak to anybody?
Well, I think we have to realize that the digital tools that we use to connect, whether it's, social media or any of these great digital tools that we have, they're just tools that we have. And it comes back to people have to realize that relationships are built by shared experiences, and that throughout history, and this isn't going to change, people are going to choose to do business and bring opportunities to people who they know, they like, and they trust. But trust is becoming a bigger issue because people aren't going to things like the Austin Technology Council like they did 30 years ago or 20 years ago. People tend to want to self-select. They want to go to a private dinner at Perry's Steakhouse with like 7 curated people who are all just like them. But the problem is that takes some of the serendipity out of it. So we have to have those collisions of different things. So it's great that we have groups around town who are an AI group, and we have the fintech group and the medtech group and all the different verticals. But if we don't have a thread that runs through everything in our community, then those collisions of those things coming together is a problem. And I think it's a societal shift. We have to shift back to this idea that, people matter, people come first. And I think trust becomes a really big deal. The other day we were talking about, people can now create videos showing themselves anywhere. You could show yourself, on the moon. You could put yourself right in the Apollo landing, or, people are doing marketing videos as speakers and showing themselves on these giant arena stages with jumbotrons behind them. Well, they've never spoken more than to a room of 12 people. So with AI, we're now able to create, and it's getting more realistic every day. And everybody's talking about the deep fakes, where someone is making a video where they're maybe using your image and your voice and they're doing something nefarious. I'm more worried about the intentional fakes of people being able to say, look at how great I am, or look at all the things we're doing and creating all of this. And I think that we're going to have to get back to that human to human piece, because if I sit in a room with you and have a conversation, if I have lunch with you, John, at the country club, it's easier for me to know, like, and trust you than if I'm just listening to you on a podcast, because Andreas could have just cloned our voices and done this whole thing himself. Nobody knows for sure. Just
Oh, by
because
the way, I'm playing golf now.
you're not even here. Right. It's John's avatar who's here. So
Yeah,
long answer to your question. I think the real leaders in our communities, and it's not just Austin. I mean, every city, but then communities are also in industries, and there's global communities. I think the real leaders have to lead by example. They have to show that real leaders show up in the room once in a while.
I like that. And let me just follow this. When we saw this coming, I was a member of the Austin Area Research Council for years. And we had sister cities that we wanted to do face to face. And then there were small cities like Round Rock and Pflugerville and Westlake, and it goes on and on. And at the Austin Area Research Organization, we wanted people to be face to face because I think that people like Pike Power, bless his soul, understood the importance of what you call human interaction. But I can tell you this, Tom, my colleagues and I, we understand that the next generation, they're just not interested in that. So one of the biggest changes I had as a professor, I thought everybody wanted to come see me at my office hours. When email came, nobody came and just sent me an email. And now I have ex-students who are 40, 50 years old, and they're looking for an opportunity. Dear Professor Butler, this is my photo. I hope you remember me. Can you please write me a letter? But
Mhm.
but I think the most important thing that you said is that doing business, doing enterprises with people, right? Doing enterprise with people will never change. But will there be trust on the internet?
Well, you bring up an interesting thing when you say, the next generation isn't as interested. I think the next generation is interested in anything that's going to give them an advantage and make them money. And I think they've been told for the last decade, you don't need to show up. You can do it all digitally.
Right.
And that's why I think the leaders have to show them. I think they'll be interested in showing up in droves to in-person stuff if all of a sudden they see the few who break out. If you really look at who's getting funded, who's getting promoted, who's getting opportunities, if those people happen to be, people who are doing this, then people will follow suit. And I think the problem is we've had these outliers, these things where somebody starts a company by themselves and sells it for $1 billion. That's awesome. And I admire it. And I'm a capitalist. I wish it was me. That's freaking great. But it is still an outlier. And if you really look at business, you still have these conglomerations of humans that get together and share ideas. I have a friend who is a researcher in sort of the scientific mathematic area, and he likes to go to the office, but he's a math guy. He's an introvert. And I said, why do you like going to the office? And he goes, the type of math research that we do, he goes, it's like art. You can't do it all yourself. So he'll go in and he'll whiteboard with another quant, and they'll be able to do this whole thing, and it gets done faster than if they have to log on to Zoom or something else. So the being face to face helps with the creativity. And so I think we just need to, as a society, we need to talk about that. It's not either or. It's not all in person or all digital. We live in a world that's going to be intermingled, and I think that we have to be leading that by example.
Mm-hmm. Llewellyn.
Yeah, I agree with everything you say. So obviously, I have no questions to ask you. Tom, you made a great case for community. What about affinity of location? I mean, why, if I'm starting a new company, should I locate it in Austin? Some people, from the end of the last century, a lot of companies thought they should be located in Washington, D.C. and its environment. And they did. They put up the cost of houses and may create a lot of traffic, and not sure they got what they came for. What they did is they got interface with the government, but not with each other. We have the 128 in Boston, the affinity there. But then you have what were outliers that have created their own ecosystems in different places, Microsoft in Seattle, for example. So how important is it for a new company to locate, say, in Austin or in San Antonio, or maybe in some other place altogether? What should you be looking for? You used to look for education, natural resources, and then, of course, taxes, that kind of thing. But if your main goal is the rewards of affinity, like-minded people you can speak to close by. How should you gauge that and select your location?
So I think that is still important, although not necessarily as important as maybe it was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, if you started a company in Austin, you did it because there were a lot of other technology companies. We were 30 years ago a software town, so there was a lot of software engineers. There were a lot of other entrepreneurs who were doing things. So the economies of scale came together as Austin started to grow. You had law firms from California move here who specialized in startups and incorporating them in mergers and stuff like that. You had the accounting firms who worked with tech firms. So you ended up with these economies of scale where all the service providers came and everything else. A lot of that work can be done remotely now, but it used to be if you started a company in Austin and you grew to 1,000 or let's say 5,000 employees, most of those employees probably would have been near your headquarters office. You might have had some satellites. So you had a direct effect on the whole community. If you're employing 5,000 people, you're impacting that neighborhood. However, now you could start a company and grow it just as fast to 5,000 people, but 1,000 could be in India, 1,000 could be in Ukraine, a bunch of them could be in Topeka, et cetera. So the need for everybody to be together or for everybody in a company to be together is less than it was. But I think there is still that human thing that if you're around people who are like-minded and doing things, there's the old expression, you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I don't think that's scientifically proven, but I like to, from an observational level, believe that's true. That if you're hanging out with 5 fit, ambitious, entrepreneurial people, you're going to find yourself in better shape, working hard and starting companies than if you're hanging out with 5 overweight donut eaters. And so I think that there's still that thing of getting around the right people. However, I think that you're seeing it with companies. Everybody thought we were going to be 100% remote after the pandemic. And a majority of companies are going back to 4 days a week. I heard recently that more companies in 26 are going to go 5 days a week back in the office. So you're starting to see people are finding that having people together not only makes people productive. There are people who are more productive working from home, but in general, as a society, we're pack people, right? So when we're around each other, we feed off each other and all that. So I think it still exists. I think it's still important, and I think that's why you still see medical research and things like that in San Diego and Boston. And you see, certain types of things in Austin, et cetera. What's happening to Austin that's great is we're becoming very diverse, though. We probably have 12 different verticals now where things are actually happening and booming, which leads people to want to be here as well. So I think it's a fine line. You don't have to all be in the same place, but I still think, we can have all this technology. People are still the same. I mean, if you go read stories out of the Bible, you're still going to read about lust and greed. You're going to read about war and famine. You're going to read about business dealings that were good and bad. It's the same stories 2,000 years
I
later.
didn't know Professor Butler was in the Bible.
Well, I think that you should know that. Thank you very much for putting that out. But let me just iterate.
Let me just finish my line of questioning.
Okay.
Thom, tell me, what is the declared mission of the Austin Technology Council, and what should other cities copy that you do and have gotten right?
So historically, we were founded for a lot of purposes, and one of them was to help bring the technology community and those software, engineers and entrepreneurs together so that they could get those economies of scales and ideas. But also, we were founded to help put, one of the things in the founding papers was to help put tech on the map as a possible economic driver of Central Texas. Now, that's no longer our purpose. I think there isn't a person on the planet who doesn't realize that technology is driving the economy of this region. So today we have 3 areas we focus on. One is education. So we do education. We do an educational breakfast every month. I'm trying to raise that if I can get more funding, where we're doing some higher end education, more for entrepreneurship and for sort of more science oriented stuff. But without money, it's hard to do. But education is number 1. Number 2 is community. So it's bringing people together. It's allowing those collisions to happen. So like before South by, we have a big happy hour that'll have 350 people at it. According to the last 3 years, that was our numbers. It might be bigger this year. But and we do networking breakfasts and we partner with other nonprofits in the area to try and have this cross section brought together. So building community and that is important. And then the final thing is advocacy. And while we don't do anything directly right now at the state or the city level, we are part of a group called the Technology Councils of North America that is a lobbying organization for small to mid-sized growth-oriented companies in Washington, D.C. Well, companies everywhere, but they lobby in Washington, D.C. because something like 80% of all laws that pass or fail that have to do with technology are lobbied for by the 6 big tech companies. And that's great. They've got big budgets. They've got people. We appreciate that they lobby, but their goals aren't always the same of a growth-oriented company that's in between startup and enterprise company. And that's where Austin needs to focus. So my belief is ATC, and we're not there yet in this rebirth that we're trying to do, we need to focus on those mid-size and smaller and mid-size growth-oriented companies, because we have a lot of organizations that help the startups. There's, tons of organizations historically in Austin that have been helping, Becky with an idea and her startup. And the large enterprise companies all have offices here. Many have moved their headquarters here. Some are homegrown. They don't seem to have a need to, have a community group. However, those mid-sized companies, they share things in common. They need employees. They need to, they need to deal with stuff. And the lobbying that takes place in DC can work against them if they're not paying attention. So those are our 3 areas: is education, community, and advocacy.
And what have you achieved that other cities can, at the council, that other cities forming their own new council can imitate advice?
I think if you go back and look at the last 30 years, Austin is the poster child for a breakout ecosystem, right? There's nobody who comes close, really, because you've got the Valley, you've got New York, you've got Boston. But in reality, there was a whole bunch of cities that were around 1 million people 30 years ago, that very few of them are now 2.5 million people that are now tech powerhouses. So Austin did a lot right. And one of the things we did right is people came together without anybody having to be sort of the sovereign leader. What kills an ecosystem is when some group of people need to be king or queen. And so you see it in some smaller towns where the Chamber of Commerce wants to own, or the city wants to own the tech growth corridor or whatever. What happened in Austin is it came together sort of organically. And we have to give a lot of credit to Dr. George Kosmetsky. And John and I talk, Dr. Butler and I talk a lot about, he had a famous quote that said, if we don't come together and build an economic business community, where will our grandchildren work? Because Austin of 40 years ago didn't have a big business community. So people would go to UT, they'd have to move to Dallas, Houston, New York, Los Angeles, whatever, to have big careers. Well, now you can have a big career right here in Austin if you want to work for a big company or if you want to work for a startup. So we have this diverse ecosystem. And I think that's the thing growing cities have to realize is you can't hang up a shingle and say, we're the place for all tech in the town. You need to have an unofficial coalition. And this is my observation. John can jump in and say where I'm right and wrong. But you had the university, you had the city, the state, and you had the business community who all, and then individual entrepreneurs and things like that, who all came together. I don't think they all liked each other all the time, but they all knew that they were working towards that same goal of rising Austin up and making it an attractive place for people to bring jobs and for entrepreneurial people to move here. And so I think that's what other cities need to do, is you need to think of the long term. It's not, how do we get there in 5 years? It's a long term. A smaller city called me recently and they wanted to start the next South by Southwest. And they asked for my advice. And I said, well, you need a time machine. And 38 years ago, you need to start a music festival. And then right at the time that the internet's coming up and there's these people doing interactive things, you need to start a little tech conference. And then you need the whole internet to explode at the same time. I'm like, you couldn't have planned the growth of South by Southwest. It had to happen organically. And that's true for the whole ecosystem. You can't overplan what your next steps are, but you have to have a lot of leaders. There's not a seat at the table. There has to be a lot of tables where people can find their place. And if somebody can't find a place at a table, they're free to start their own table. And those tables need to not be fighting against each other. I'm working with the Chamber of Commerce, Austin Women in Technology, and several other groups, what we're unofficially calling One Austin. And the idea is the business nonprofits, we promote each other's events. It's good for somebody who's part of the ATC world to know what's going on at Austin Women in Technology, to know what's going on at the AI Alliance, to know what's going on at the Chamber, et cetera, Opportunity Austin. So if we can promote each other and still compete, we compete for sponsorship money and memberships and whatever. But if we realize that we're one ecosystem, then we're going to grow. And I think that's the advice for other cities is don't fight, don't interfight. if you don't like each other, leave your ego at the door for that one meeting. You don't have to like, you don't have to be best friends. But if everybody has a loose goal that we're trying to do this, then you're going to have the success. And I think that's what Austin did.
I think you're right, and you shouldn't criticize Austin 360 like you did. They tried to take over. But let me ask you a question. Let's talk about the movement of capital. And when the experiment was started, we had no capital. Most of the capital, the wealthy people were in car dealers. Let's talk
Right.
about where that cap. We have created so much wealth. So many of my students are just flat out. I had a saying, well, and when people came to my class, I said, look, everybody's got a million in Austin. A billion is the number. And my students write me back. So let me ask you this. We started with the Capital Network. And when Michael went public, he created, gosh, 980
Yep.
millionaires. That's 30 million in the bank. And so we had a little ecosystem. And then we had some other companies, but let's not forget what made us great also were the restaurants. It was John Mackey's crazy idea that he didn't want to eat anything, and he created Whole Foods. It was the ironworks. So the restaurants was very, very interesting. But right now, I mean, I think the time has moved on. There's so much wealth in Austin. We're so fat and wealthy that people are not looking to say, what can I do with my wealth? It has all gone into family offices.
Mhm.
I think that America is broke. I think that China is broke. But Tom, the family offices in Texas is trillions.
Yep.
It's billions. Working with a family office in Houston, father, two sons, is worth 6 billion. The family offices in oil and gas in Minden, 10 billion. So what has changed is, and let's talk about people and the movement of that capital. As you said, it is the attitude of people. What people would say is, okay, I just made, Dr. Butler, I just sold a company for, 360 million. Who can I fund? So where's the capital now? Well, why isn't capital flowing like it used to flow? And by the way, when you look at Texas, most of the we didn't do a lot of venture capital in Texas. It was all family and friends. But all of the startup money was in Austin, just like it was in Silicon Valley. So where do you see the flow of money? Where is it now? And what is wealth doing to enhance our future now?
So I think one of the problems is we only chart venture numbers, right? You get everything released every year of what cities have the biggest venture money, and
Oh
we're
yeah.
number 4 or number 5. I forget the latest
Which
number.
we never use. We never use it. Okay.
Right, but the other thing is that if we have 5 billion in funding or whatever the number was, and the Silicon Valley is 38 billion in funding, we're not really number 5. The Silicon
Right.
Valley took the first 10 spots. So we can't compare. And this is the thing that nobody in Austin compares ourselves to the Silicon Valley. Nobody in Austin says we want to be the next Silicon Valley. The press likes to say it. People in the
We
Silicon
don't do that.
Valley like to say Austin wants to be the next Silicon Valley. Austin's just trying to be a successful place of Austin. But I do think that there was a time where startups were sexy and people were investing, and you did have the billionaires and other people who were investing in angel money and stuff like that. A lot of that money, because not everybody made it, right? There's a lot of startups that don't make it. So if you're putting money in at that level, a lot of it goes away. And so I think a lot of those places aren't as generous with the money as maybe they should. And I also think as a greater society, not just Austin, but the United States at least, it used to be if you were successful, you immediately said, what can I do to give back to my community? Whether that was serving on a board, whether that was giving to charities, or whether that was investing in the next generation of entrepreneurs. And I think oftentimes people don't naturally go to that level. So I think the money's around. And I think, again, going back to what I was saying before, we have to lead by example. I think the family offices that are investing in the next generation of businesses, I think they need to be more vocal about it. I think a lot of this stuff happens, it's not like the VCs who press release everything. I think a lot of this stuff happens behind the scenes. And I think that if it was more public, I think you'd see more people follow suit. Also, I think that, we need to be thinking about if you have $10 billion, what are you doing to help the next class of entrepreneurs? People forget where they were 30 years ago. A lot of these people, they were scrappy and knocking on doors and walking into your office and asking for advice. And I think they need to educate the next generation to be just as scrappy.
And I
Tom, I
take
have a
my hat off
question.
to
Let me follow up on all these questions.
go ahead.
We will be remiss if we don't talk or at least have an opinion or at least explore what is the influence of the richest man in the world, the latest Austinite, Elon Musk. He's been moving his companies to the region. He has an incredible influence on technology. Automobiles are now in Austin. Autonomous things are now in Austin. Space is now in Austin. Boring and tunneling companies are now in Austin. And he brings an ecosystem of companies that follow him. Can you share, anecdotally or
Sure.
whatever you can share, what is the impact of Elon Musk so far in Austin?
So I hear it a lot from other cities because I talk to these tech council people in other towns and I hear from reporters who are writing articles. There's a lot of people who think that they give him the credit for Austin being this tech boom town. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. What has it been? 7 years that he moved? It wasn't. I don't remember the exact years, but it's less than 10 years. We can
Yep.
trace the beginning of the tech boom back to the 60s with the hiring
Oh
of
yeah.
Dr. Kosmetzky in 1966. You can start charting Austin's tech growth back 60 years.
Yeah.
So, the interesting thing is that I don't think he gets credit for anything that's going on in Austin. Now, I am a big believer that anybody who is bringing good paying jobs, technology or otherwise, manufacturing or otherwise, to Central Texas, we like that. We want people employed. We want people to have opportunities for growth. So that's great. And he brought the companies, but I have not seen, and this is observational, I've
Hmm.
not seen the leaders in Austin of those companies serving on the board of the chamber, the board of the Austin Technology Council,
Hmm.
the Opportunity Austin board.
Hmm.
There's 20 groups that make
Right.
up this ecosystem of tech business and adjacent. And the
Hmm.
other thing is, we also in Austin, a little side note, we've spent 40 years talking about the business community and the tech community. I don't think anybody's noticed that they are entirely intertwined. There is no business community and tech community. All businesses are either tech or tech enabled. So everybody is a part of the business community.
I agree.
Hmm.
But you don't see the leaders in those companies. They might be giving a lot of money to charities that are like, cause type charities, but you
Hmm.
don't see them leading and volunteering or even showing up. Now, that doesn't mean no one from Tesla or Boring has never come to something. I've met a few people, but you don't see them in leadership roles in the
Hmm.
organizations that are actively trying to influence the future. So I think it's great that the jobs are here, and I think it's great that the attention comes with it. But at the same time, real leaders show up.
So there is an opportunity for them to participate in a more purposely driven
I,
way
I think
if they're listening, if they're listening.
I think every organization that I just named would love to have executives from Tesla and Boring and SpaceX come and say, how can we serve the community? Yeah, I think that
Yeah,
would be great.
yeah, yeah.
That's a
Llewellyn.
very interesting point because after Musk himself, there's a kind of anonymity about his companies. Most companies, there are several strong figures that we know, the head of design or the head of this, but we don't have that public participation from the executive level of the Elon Musk companies. It's interesting. I think it's unfortunate too.
Well, I think that a number of things have happened. I think that one of our characteristics that we had was that we put wealth to work. Wealth did not hide, and we were one of the first cities in America that celebrated wealth. Okay,
Yes.
we did not, and let me go back to 1970s with our education. When we came out of the great industrial sector, we had the best jobs in the Western world. Nobody asked where did those jobs come from. Nobody asked how did Ford create Ford Motor Companies. Nobody asked how could someone drop out of high school, right, and go right and create Ford Motor Company. So we had to go back and do that, and we celebrated wealth. Dave Gibson created something in the Austin American Statesman called, Monday Morning Update. And we literally published how successful people has been. You remember philosophically, we don't celebrate wealth. And I think Austin is coming to the point where there's less of a celebration. And finally, in Texas, it's not the politicians that run this big state, it's the merchants. We love Abbott to death, but it's the merchants who actually run the state. So I think when we stop and look at things, and we look what we've got in the future, and Andreas, his area. I mean, he did our first smart grid here, the smart grid here in Texas. So I think the wealth question has to be, look, they've got to come back to celebrate wealth, and let's not be jealous of Elon Musk. Let's
Right.
celebrate him. Let's put
Yeah.
him in Tech Monday, and let's celebrate him. And
You,
let's
you,
celebrate thunderclouds.
you
Nobody
bring up
understands that thunderclouds is one of the great companies in Austin.
when you
Right.
bring up an interesting thing, when Tech Monday used to come out in the Statesman on Monday, and it was all about what was going on in the tech community. If your company had a subscription with maybe two papers, people would show
Right.
up early on Monday to make sure they were getting the business section first, so they could read it first before it made its way around
Yep.
the office. So we not only celebrated the wealth and the success, we celebrated as a community the successes that were happening around us. And I think that that's
Absolutely.
exactly what we need to get back to. And I want to add one thing, and that is, as a state, a lot of it to do with highway funds, our cities have competed against each other for 100 years. Dallas versus Houston, Houston versus Austin, San Antonio. What's happening now in tech? Dallas is one of the fastest growing technology centers in the country. More
Mhm.
headquarters are moving to Dallas than anywhere else in the country.
Mhm.
And a lot of those are tech companies. And I think that what we need to do, instead of Austin versus Dallas or Houston versus Dallas, I think we need to start looking at what they've been calling a couple different terms, but the Texas technology triangle, the Austin,
Yep.
Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, corridor or triangle or whatever it is. I think we need to start working together more. I've been trying to reach out to groups in those different cities, from like a tech council type organizations, to how do we
Mhm.
work together and think like the Texas
Mhm.
organizations? Because if you look at the growth that's happening in Texas, we're going to be the most populous state within the next decade. And we're going to probably become GDP, the number one state, at least in the next 15 years, something like that, I've heard. And
Mhm.
a lot of that is going to be around technology. So instead of, if Dallas wins a relocation, instead of Austin being like, we didn't get it. No, if it comes to Texas, we all win. And I think we need to reformulate the way
Mhm.
we think as Texas within
Agreed.
within business, not just tech. Because you're right,
Agreed.
we should be celebrating Thundercloud subs just as much as we're celebrating Tesla. Because again, different people, but people are being put to work. People are giving opportunities, and if people have opportunities, they get to go to the next thing and the next thing. And we have to remember that we're an
Mhm.
ecosystem, which means you've got to have the dry cleaners, and you've got to have the sub shops, and you've got to have the taquerias in order to have the robotics companies.
Mhm.
We're all part of one, and I think we have to start looking beyond Austin and start looking Texas wide. There, look at what's going on in the Brazos Valley. I would say 90% of people who are active in business in Texas have no idea the growth that's happening in business and tech in the Brazos Valley, and yet it's happening. So I think we need to start paying attention and talking about that and cultivating it. So places like the Brazos Valley, San Antonio, El Paso, we forget they're there.
Brownsville.
Can
Brownsville.
Brownsville, yeah, another place that can all be working together to rise up the ocean for all of our ships to rise.
So Tom, one quick follow-up on that. Just really curious, and I hope the Elon Musk effect and the impact really starts, cementing into the community elements that you discuss. What about the universities, and what role do they play? I know the UT gets a credit for, sort of crafting the incubator and all these things with Kosmeski and Dr. Butler, but what about the other universities? And we have many that people don't talk about, don't
Sure.
know. In Austin itself, black colleges, all kinds
Houston,
of.
Tillotson, St. Ed's, Concordia. You've got Texas State. You've got several. You go out as far as A&M. If you look at the whole
Yeah.
region, go up as far as Waco. You've got Baylor and others. So yes, the universities are important. Now, what's interesting is when I look at the technology councils in these growing areas that are
Hmm.
getting a lot of attention for being the next tier below Austin,
Hmm.
their universities are funding them. They're getting,
Hmm.
25, 50, $100,000 from their university. If you look at places like Pittsburgh, Pitt and Carnegie Mellon are funding their tech council to make
Hmm.
sure that they're vibrant and they're growing. I don't get anything from the universities to
Mm.
help with this whole idea of building, this thread that runs through everything. Um, some of these cities have 18 people on their tech council staff and a budget of $7 million. We've got me, and I think that again, it comes from those different pieces of the community not having to own everything, but saying, let's all work together. We'll give a little here, we'll give a little there, but they'll give a little here and a little there. And all of a sudden, all of these organizations can do better. So I think we need to get back to where the universities are realizing that they're driving a lot of research. They're putting out the people who can do the work. And I think that they have to realize they're part of the ecosystem. And I won't say which university, but I talked to someone at a university and they told me universities don't support community efforts in the business community. And I had a whole list of tech councils that are funded at six figures by universities. So,
Mm.
I mean, you look what's going on in Arizona and other places that these entities of government, business, traditional business, chambers of commerce, and government, et cetera, they're all working together at their little piece. And that's how you grow an ecosystem. And I think part of the thing is we forget we're only halfway up the mountain. Austin is still a scrappy growth city. And I think that
Mm.
we need to be reminded of that sometimes, that we're only in 12th grade on our way to a PhD and a career. Do you remember 12th grade? You think you're on top of the world. And a year later, you're like, oh, I'm nowhere. And I think that Austin, we are the poster child over the last 30 years of how do you grow out of, an obscure, university town into being a tech giant. But we have a long way to go. There's a lot more
Mm.
growth that can take place in Austin.
I do
Absolutely.
agree, and I think if you look at Renss Institute in New York, and we really kind of model ourselves after a lot of the Eastern universities that really did good, and but let me just comment on the university thing. I think that UT Austin has pulled back, from their community engagement. That's my opinion, which is
It's
always
true.
correct and unbiased. Uh, when I was director of RC Square, I was getting 850,000 from the city. And when I spoke before the faculty senate, I talked about there were students who went there as a laboratory. I considered ATI a laboratory. When I spoke to the city council, I talked about the amount of tax monies that was being provided by the enterprises. But I agree. I think that universities have pulled back, and that just isn't good because I think that Stanford created Silicon Valley. I think IC Square, not the University of Texas, at the university created Austin. I think MIT
For sure.
completely redid Boston. And I
Look at
don't
what
think the
Carnegie Mellon's
university,
doing. Look at what Carnegie Mellon's doing in Pittsburgh. And
yeah,
it's
yeah, and I don't
amazing.
think the University of Michigan did a damn thing for Detroit. I tell them we would not allow. And remember, Tom, in the 1980s, Houston was having an issue, and we went to Rice University to create the Rice Alliance. And what Gary Catonhead did, who was
I
we had
remember.
the
Yeah.
first business plan competition. It was just amazing. So Houston came back as a diverse city in business enterprises, not just oil and gas,
Right.
but Rice took them to a high level. Now let me just comment on the different cities. When I go to Dallas, I rent a Rolls Royce and put on a suit. When I go to Austin, I put my blue jeans on and put on a and put on a jacket. Right. And when I go to San Antonio, I feel like I'm in Europe. I have been working in Brownsville, which I think is the most exciting place with all of the technology, the missile technology, and et cetera. So how do you bring all of these things together? Well, if you look at how we educate people, and I just say I think that getting rid of the Dream Act in Texas was just horrible. Andreas, the Dream Act was that if you were, if you were a child of an illegal family, but you were very, very smart, we paid your way to
Hmm.
college,
Mhm.
right? Well, that's gone now, right? And I think that my question to you is, how do we bring this great country, the whole country together, looking forward, looking to competitors? And I happen to think that Austin, Texas is more of a story than China
Hmm.
because we had nothing but
Mhm.
jobs, but universities, where we had state farm and state government. So how do you bring us all together? I mean,
Sure.
what does Andres Cavalli need to do, which he's doing? That's what I'm getting to. How do we bring us together under an Austin model, which I have books on, for the entire country?
Hmm. Llewellyn?
It's fascinating. I think I want to ask one more question, and that is I lived in Washington, D.C. from 1966 to 2012. And in that time, it became a hot place for business. It grew out, and it became harder and harder to live there. The traffic became impossible, housing became more difficult. People started commutes that were getting longer and longer. They're commuting from practically Front Royal 95 miles. And in the end, it it took the sheen off Washington as a place to put a business. It'll remain very important because it's the seat of government. I just would raise that subject when I hear the enthusiasm about Austin, which is justified. And I might say that I was in Austin before it boomed. I was invited down, I think, in the 1980s to address the legislature about the energy crisis. But you've got a problem. If you win, you lose.
Mm-hmm.
Get this congestion, you get sprawl, and you lose livability. And I just throw that on the table as something that you might want to keep an eye on.
And I think we're suffering from that. I mean, I think that the cost of living went up. Now it's come down a little bit for housing. We boomed a little unnatural during the pandemic, and we came down, but we didn't come down farther than where we were in 19. Like my house is still worth more now than it was in 19. It just spiked in 21. So we're still a growth town. When you look at the actual growth of the cost of housing, it's still slow and up to the right. There's that little spike that came back down, but we definitely have traffic issues. And I think most cities end up behind when it comes to infrastructure. I went to college in San Diego in the 80s, and it was a giant construction site because before that, the city council in San Diego kind of had this attitude, if we don't build roads, nobody will move here. And then people moved there anyway. So the late 80s and 90s became a thing. Well, Austin had the same problem 20 years later. We didn't build the roads we should have built when we saw it coming. So I definitely think you run into some of that problem. But I think that, I believe that community collaboration and conversations can solve all problems. And so I think that as a community, we need to be working together and talking about these things rather than saying, well, that's their problem or something else like that.
Agreed. Final thoughts, gentlemen.
I think that is my final thought. I'd like to say, Thom, I think you're a very enterprising and engaging man and very, very articulate. I found this most stimulating hour.
I'll get academic. I did a book chapter on Austin, Texas, 2000 BC. Cities have always developed around new technologies, whether it was new clay, whether it was new materials, whether it was oil and gas, or whatever the case might be. And I think that, Thom, you hit exactly right. We have to have the leadership to understand how to look into the future around technology kinds of ideas. I always say the most important course I had at Northwestern University was entitled The Impact of Technology on Society, taught by Archie Feldman. And we looked at everything from the impact of the railroads, the impact of the telegram, the impact of the telegraph. And I think as we move forward with the new biology and the new cloud stuff, we need councils that would take the place, I think, of city councils. I think that every city council should have and work with a technology council. And I'm going to tell a story. We had a major company here in Austin that said the following: if all of my clients are around the world now, why should I join the Chamber of Commerce? Why should I join the Chamber of Commerce? And I think that question that was done one of our major great companies in Austin, you know who it is.
I know.
We've got to say the same thing. And what that does is decouple the company from its international, so to speak. And the answer was, we work locally to do great things, and then we go internationally
Right.
and nationally do great things. So Tom, I think that what you're doing is wonderful. But
Well,
I
I'm
do
trying.
believe that you should be an arm of the city council. I think that they should fund you, and I think that we should work on that.
Well, I'm open to all the help that we can get, but
Yeah,
you know, if I had one message, it would be to the successful entrepreneur who, whether they've exited or not, they're doing well, they have that mid-growth company, or to the large companies who've moved here to realize that, you know, plant the flag and help put your name on something. It doesn't have to be the Austin Technology Council, but don't start something new. We already have 20 organizations. Find a way
Yeah,
to get in and influence something. And I like to say, I've got a 34-year-old startup because we've got a blank slate of where we can take this organization. And what it needs is it needs leadership and money. And that leadership and money has to come from the successful people in the tech community.
absolutely. Absolutely. Johnny, take us away. Tom, thank you. We will have you again.
we're gonna celebrate Mardi Gras. There is a house in New Orleans. They call the rising sun, and it's been the ruin of many a poor boy. And God, you know that I'm warm.
Woo! Well done. Well done. Tom, we'll
Thank
circle
you.
back. We'll circle back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good day.
Okay,
You
Tom, I'll
too.
call you. Okay, take care. Bye
Bye.
bye.
John, we have a